I remember the moment clearly, not because it was dramatic, but because it settled in me like a quiet shadow, a little voice, barely noticeable, whispering that I wasn't meant for anything big. I was a kid, sitting at the kitchen table, watching my dad count his money with a furrowed brow. "Money's always a problem," he muttered, tossing bills into his worn wallet. "Best not to dream too high. Otherwise, you set yourself up to get hurt." His words didn't sound like advice. They felt like a warning. I didn't know then how deeply they would settle into my mind, shaping how I saw the world and my place in it. As I grew older, I encountered those little echoes everywhere. From my teachers, friends, even on TV, the idea that certain things were not for people like me never quite left me. When I thought about money, success, or even taking a risk, there was a gentle but firm resistance from within, a voice reminding me to stay safe, play small, be careful. And over time, I came to believe it was just common sense, that boundaries weren't just limits. They were rules etched by reality itself. But here's what's strange. Those limits rarely came from who I was or what I wanted. They were handed down like a secret code, a kind of invisible programming I didn't see at first. And this code made me think that the safe, the small, the certain, was all I could ever have. I thought I was protecting myself from pain. But in truth, I was closing myself off from possibility. I see now how much that early curve of thinking didn't belong to me. It was like being trained not to reach beyond what felt comfortable, not to hope for more than what was deemed reasonable, not to try without fear lurking in the back of my mind. And the irony is bitter. This training happened when I was too young to question it, before I had the language to understand it, when I was supposed to be learning that money was a tool, not a burden, a friend, not a foe. Instead, I learned to see money as a source of worry, conflict, even suffering. In the years that followed, this programming didn't just whisper. It shouted in moments when I was faced with bigger opportunities or new financial possibilities. Something inside me tugged me backwards, toward what was familiar and safe. I found myself shrinking my goals, settling for less, or hesitating at the very moment I could leap. I'd tell myself that the bigger path was too risky, that I wasn't ready, or simply that that's just not meant for me. Sometimes I'd get angry with myself for holding back, frustrated at the invisible barrier keeping me from stepping into a fuller version of my life. But the truth is, it wasn't just about willpower or lack of courage. Something deeper was at work, something embedded so early and so subtly it felt like part of my identity. Other times, I caught glimpses of what could be, moments when I saw someone break free from similar patterns, or when I dared to dream, even briefly, without the familiar hesitation. Those moments felt like glimpses into another world, one where money wasn't a source of fear, but a source of possibility, where I wasn't boxed in by old fears, but expanding towards something new. In those moments, the pull of that invisible code lessened, and I felt what real freedom might feel like. Yet, even with those sparks of hope, I realized that this was no simple fix. Changing this way of thinking meant more than making new budgets or setting financial goals. It meant diving into the hidden currents beneath my choices, currents formed by unconscious memories, unspoken fears, and lessons I absorbed long before I understood what money really was. It meant learning to see the programming for what it was and gently, patiently, untangling it from who I was truly meant to be. As I share this with you, I want you to know you are not alone. Maybe you feel that quiet tug holding you back, the voice that says you're safer dreaming small. Or maybe you've recognized the patterns, but haven't known how to step beyond them. What I want to invite you into is a journey, not to blame or shame that old programming, but to understand it deeply, to compassionately uncover its source, and to find the power to write a new story. This isn't about quick fixes or magic solutions. It's about exploring the hidden script running your money story and discovering that beneath it, there's a deeper capacity for growth, abundance, and freedom waiting to emerge. Together, we'll trace the path from that early training to the ways it shapes your choices now. We'll encounter the emotional roots, those quiet beliefs stored in your brain and heart. And most importantly, we'll open the door to a new way of seeing money, yourself, and what's truly possible. I invite you to listen, not just with your ears, but with your whole being, as we begin this exploration. Because the hero's journey is real, and it starts not with changing the outside world, but with understanding the invisible forces inside. When the inner system shifts, the outer world follows. And that's where true financial freedom begins. I remember sitting across from a close friend a few years ago, sharing how I consistently chose smaller, safer financial moves, even when my instincts nudged me toward bigger opportunities. She looked at me with genuine curiosity and said, "It's like you've trained yourself to aim just within arm's reach, afraid that anything beyond might slip through your fingers." Her observation struck a chord deep within me. It wasn't just about fear. It was as if my mind had been rehearsed to favor the familiar stage, refusing to step into a spotlight that seemed uncomfortably bright. There's something fascinating about this rehearsed caution. It acts almost like an internal GPS, calibrated by past experiences and lessons that silently signal, err on the side of safety. Yet, this calibration doesn't arise spontaneously. It's sculpted by countless small influences layered over time. These subtle cues often come disguised in everyday conversations or repeated expressions within our family circles, such as "don't get ahead of yourself," or "better to have a little and keep it than lose it all." Each phrase paints a brushstroke on the canvas of our financial worldview, nudging us in particular directions without overt force. I think back to a time when I hesitated to invest in a promising project, even though the numbers and my intuition aligned positively. Instead of leaping, I stayed rooted in the comfort of what I had, telling myself that playing it safe was wiser. That hesitation didn't just grow from risk aversion. It sprouted from early emotional experiences where taking risks might have led to disappointment or reprimand. Over time, those silent lessons seeped into my decision-making circuitry, quietly defining how I assess what's too much or just enough. One afternoon, reflecting on this bias, I noticed how often I defaulted to stories in my head about the dangers of overreaching. It was as if an inner narrator rehearsed cautionary tales, warning me to expect setbacks if I dared to dream beyond certain limits. The realization hit me that this internal storyteller wasn't neutral. It had a particular voice, shaped by voices I'd absorbed long before I understood their impact. Unraveling that voice became key to reconfiguring my response to financial possibilities. What made this inner dialogue even more compelling was how stubbornly it resisted evidence to the contrary. Even after small successes or encouraging feedback from others, there lingered a suspicion that these triumphs were mere flukes or exceptions, not the rule. It was like carrying a mental discount rate on my wins, automatically diminishing their significance before they could bolster my confidence. This mental pattern contributed to a cycle where opportunities appeared daunting rather than promising, reinforcing the choice to stick to what I know. In another instance, I recall watching a mentor navigate her finances with a sense of adventurous curiosity that sharply contrasted with my hesitancy. She spoke openly about taking calculated risks, framing uncertainty as an invitation rather than a threat. Her language wove stories of empowerment, possibility, and learning through trials. Watching her, I realized how much my own narrative was interwoven with cautionary tales rather than ones of resilience and possibility. That contrast illuminated how deeply a narrative can anchor us, either limiting or expanding our horizons. The more I observed myself, the clearer it became how emotions like shame, anxiety, or guilt intertwined with these financial choices. It wasn't mere logic dictating my aversion to bigger risks. It was emotional undercurrents that surged beneath conscious thought. Recognizing this connection between feelings and decisions opened a path toward questioning my habitual reactions. I started asking, which feelings are steering this choice? Are they reflections of current reality or inherited fears? This inquiry led me to experiment with reframing those emotional signals. Instead of interpreting nervousness as a stop sign, I learned to see it as a prompt to slow down and gather more information, rather than abandon the path altogether. Gradually, I noticed shifts in how I approach proposals that would have once felt overwhelming. The process wasn't smooth or immediate. It required patience and self-compassion, especially in moments when old patterns tried to reclaim control. Importantly, I found that these shifts didn't imply recklessness, but rather a richer engagement with complexity. It wasn't about abandoning caution, but about distinguishing between genuine risk and inherited hesitation. This clarity helped me move beyond dichotomies of safe versus unsafe, small versus big. Instead, I could tune into my authentic appetite for growth and challenge, unclouded by echoes of past constraints. Now, consider how this applies when you face a decision that challenges your comfort zone. Perhaps an opportunity presents itself that promises growth but stirs an undercurrent of doubt. Recognizing that this doubt might be a residue from old messaging allows you to treat it differently, not as a barrier, but as a signal to approach thoughtfully, seek support, or reassess facts. This nuanced awareness transforms the dynamic entirely from one of automatic limitation to active choice. In this evolving relationship with money, the terrain shifts from a battleground of internal conflict to a landscape rich with negotiation, learning, and creativity. Embracing this complexity invites us to listen to all parts of ourselves, the cautious critic, the daring dreamer, the analytical planner, and find ways they can coexist rather than compete. It's through this integration that I sense real transformation takes root. I never thought I'd say this, but re-examining these deeply held financial restrictions has ultimately felt like reclaiming my own authorship. The journey is less about erasing old lessons and more about expanding the narrative to include new chapters. As I rewrite these stories, each word holds the power to redefine not just my finances, but my sense of self, resilience, and possibility. One evening, I found myself sitting at the edge of a quiet lake, the sky melting into shades of deep indigo. I was wrestling with a nagging unease about stepping into a new career opportunity, one that felt grander than anything I had dared pursue before. As I stared at the gentle ripples touching the shoreline, I realized the fears swirling inside me were more than just anxiety about the unknown. They were echoes of an old, silent rehearsal ingrained before I even had a chance to analyze its origins. Unlike previous reflections, this wasn't a hesitation tied solely to precaution. Instead, it arose from a pattern my psyche had adopted, associating growth with vulnerability and unfamiliarity with loss. That night, it came clear to me that my internal dialogue had learned to equate expansion with exposure, like a tree stretching its branches and risking the storm's wrath. This metaphor captured something profound about my relationship with money and opportunity. I was reluctant to invite such storms into my life, preferring the shelter of low-hanging branches. As the moonlight danced across the water, I imagined my financial mindset as a garden. Some areas were lush and flourishing. Others were choked by weeds of caution and doubt. The roots of those weeds stretched deep into memories and beliefs handed down like heirlooms. I began to recognize that tending this garden required more than just pruning. It required planting new seeds and creating space for unfamiliar growth. In the coming weeks, I began observing another facet of my conditioned patterns, how I tended to avoid conversations about money that might provoke discomfort. I'd shrink back when friends or colleagues discussed investments, wealth, or financial risks with passion or confidence. I noticed a tight knot form in my stomach at parties when wealth was flaunted or when financial success stories unfolded around me. These bodily reactions weren't just social anxieties. They were subconscious alerts triggered by unspoken lessons associating money talk with judgment or fear. This bodily awareness prompted me to courageously test boundaries. I reached out to a friend who admired financial risk-taking, confessing my insecurities about growing beyond my perceived limits. To my surprise, she responded with understanding, sharing some of her own early fears. Our dialogue became a mirror reflecting common struggles masked by facade. This experience underscored the power of vulnerability and connection, reminding me that internalized limits often isolate us unnecessarily. With newfound sensitivity, I paid attention to how my brain concocted stories to keep me safe. If an unexpected expense loomed, a flurry of worst-case scenarios cascaded vividly: job loss, debt, public failure. These imagined disasters weren't neutral thoughts. They were vivid emotional tapes woven tightly in my mind's fabric. I realized these thought patterns acted like an alarm system stuck on high alert, often blaring at shadows rather than real threats. Recognizing this, I began practicing subtle inquiries when these narratives erupted. I asked, is this fear rooted in what's true now, or a record playing from old fears? Moving away from autopilot reactions didn't erase anxiety immediately, but opened a space for curiosity and gradual recalibration. It felt like rewiring a complex circuit, one careful connection at a time. On a particularly crisp morning, I revisited a childhood memory that suddenly illuminated part of my financial blueprint. I was 10, watching my mother count pennies with her jaw clenched. Despite her efforts, she'd mutter, "Money doesn't stretch." That phrase had masqueraded as a pragmatic truth for years, silently crafting limits within me. Re-examining it, I envisioned those words as a storybook chapter that could be rewritten, perhaps into a tale about resourcefulness and unseen abundance. Later, I experimented with personal affirmations that reflected possibility instead of constraint, saying, "Resources flow to me in many unexpected ways," felt awkward initially, but gradually gained strength. This gradual embrace of a different narrative didn't dissolve fears overnight, but shifted the emotional climate beneath them. Throughout this journey, I encountered challenges confronted less with grand gestures and more through incremental awakenings. In one workshop, a facilitator described financial patterns as invisible tape, holding us to old surfaces. I pictured that tape loosening with deliberate touch, revealing new walls painted with potential. That metaphor stayed with me, reminding me that even tiny movements toward change can loosen the grip of deeply entrenched beliefs. Now, as I engage with financial decisions, I find I'm learning to differentiate protective caution from confining fear. This distinction matters because avoiding all discomfort can keep us imprisoned, while thoughtful discernment empowers wise choices. I feel increasingly equipped to discern when hesitancy signals genuine risk and when it merely masks opportunity, cloaked in apprehension. Have you noticed similar responses within yourself? A tightening chest during financial conversations, or an urge to retreat when possibilities seem too large? Increasing our awareness of these subtle physiological and emotional cues invites a more conscious relationship with money. It encourages us to listen to underlying messages without being controlled by them. Ultimately, these discoveries have transformed how I see my financial story. Rather than a fixed narrative shaped by external voices, it has become a living dialogue, complex, evolving, and filled with surprises. This ongoing dialogue allows me to invite fearless curiosity and layered wisdom into my choices, deepening my capacity to grow into what once seemed unreachable. During a chilly autumn afternoon, I found myself entangled in a conversation with my grandmother, someone whose wisdom carried the weight of generations. She recounted her youth during economic struggles, describing how scarcity shaped her choices with unyielding discipline. Her words painted a portrait of survival, of learning to measure every cent as if it held precious water in a desert. What struck me was not just her story, but the way her voice softened when she confessed how those habits translated into a persistent wariness toward financial abundance. It dawned on me that these inherited attitudes functioned like ancestral fingerprints embedded on my psyche, guiding my decisions without explicit commands. This encounter sparked an internal search, leading me to examine the invisible architecture of inherited beliefs, those passed through family lines, culture, and unspoken legacies. I realized these forces operate beneath conscious thought, as if hidden currents pulling me toward cautious shores even when vast oceans beckon. The profound realization came. The patterns steering my financial choices aren't isolated incidents. They constitute a system of inherited wiring, programmed by others long before I took my first steps. One afternoon, while sorting through old letters and photographs, I stumbled upon a faded note my mother had penned during a difficult moment. Her handwriting trembled as she jotted down advice on managing money amid uncertainty. What resonated wasn't just the practical guidance, but the shadow beneath it. Hints of anxiety and limitation interwoven with care. This glimpse into her internal world illuminated how financial attitudes transmit not only lessons, but also emotional undertones, subtle and persistent. It made me aware that exploring my financial self required peeling back layers influenced by those before me. In the following days, I engaged with this idea through journaling, allowing myself to write unsparingly about family financial stories, both those told explicitly and those sensed in silence. This practice unearthed narratives of sacrifice and deprivation alongside phrases laden with warnings and fixed boundaries. For instance, I uncovered a repeated message that wealth invites trouble, a notion embedded so deep it had shaped my instincts around opportunity and risk. Writing these truths down was akin to moving from shadow into light, offering a chance to decipher encrypted codes within my mind. During a quiet walk in the park, I reflected on how these inherited belief systems influence behavior patterns like avoidance, hesitation, and perfectionism in my financial decisions. It was as though my thoughts attended rehearsals of self-imposed restraint, carefully crafted scripts drilled into my subconscious. I noticed that this conditioning created a protective fortress, yet it also confined me, casting doubt on ventures that could yield growth. The paradox of safety locking away potential became more vivid. Then came a turning point, a conversation with a trusted mentor who challenged me gently yet firmly. She asked, "Whose voices are you still listening to without question?" That question struck me profoundly because it underscored the weight of received wisdom unexamined. It prompted me to distinguish between beliefs I had chosen and those inherited mechanically. This critical discernment was uncomfortable but necessary, a willingness to question foundations that had long underpinned my sense of security. In the weeks that followed, I experimented with subtle mental exercises aimed at rewriting these inherited narratives. For example, when the voice inside warned about dangers lurking in opportunity, I paused to ask, is this caution genuinely mine, or am I channeling fears passed down? Over time, gently disentangling my thoughts from ancestral fears felt like lifting heavy, unseen chains, rediscovering space to imagine possibilities once dismissed. I found this process required patience, as old grooves resisted change, but persistence cultivated new mental pathways. An unexpected side effect arose through conversations with peers who experienced similar ancestral patterns. Sharing stories unveiled common threads. How many of us carry unseen luggage from forebears, shaped by collective histories of hardship and scarcity? Recognizing this communal inheritance eased feelings of isolation and transformed my journey into a shared exploration. It became clear that while these programming pieces feel deeply personal, they belong to wider tapestries that bind communities across time. One afternoon, immersed in reading about cultural narratives around prosperity, I encountered a metaphor that resonated powerfully. Inherited beliefs as seeds planted in fertile soil. Some seeds, nurtured in hardship, produce thorns that discourage reaching further. Yet by consciously tending the soil and choosing new seeds, stories of abundance, resilience, and possibility, we can grow unexpected blossoms. This image offered a hopeful way to envision transformation as an active cultivation rather than rejection. Now, when I encounter old mental checkpoints that subtly limit my ambitions or provoke hesitation, I recognize them as echoes of distant ancestors whose intentions to protect echo through me. Instead of feeling burdened or defeated, I invite gratitude for the survival wisdom they conveyed, even as I step beyond their limits. This deeper awareness enriches my understanding of financial choices. They emerge from intertwined layers of history, emotion, and identity. Consider when you face hesitation around embracing financial opportunities, perhaps a promotion, investment, or entrepreneurial leap. Recognizing that the resistance may stem from voices tracing back through family or culture creates room to meet those feelings with compassion and curiosity. It allows you to gently question inherited scripts, examining which serve your growth and which confine you to outdated roles. This process is less about abandoning your foundation and more about rewriting the blueprint with conscious intent. I recall a particular moment that shifted my entire perspective on how my mind operated around financial choices. It happened during a volunteer project where I was helping teenagers build their first budgets. One boy was especially reluctant to map out his expenses, muttering, "Why bother? I'm never going to have enough anyway." His words struck a nerve, unfolding layers of an internal narrative so ingrained that it muffled hope. Watching him wrestle with defeat before even starting, I understood something critical. Our subconscious scripts steer us long before conscious decisions emerge. That encounter made me realize how deeply these mental patterns act as filters, distorting new information before it can even take root. It's like trying to plant seeds in rocky soil. No matter how fertile the seed, if the ground rejects it, nothing blooms. For me, these outdated beliefs create a kind of cognitive distortion, an automatic response system that skews data, warning signs interpreted as obstacles, promising chances dismissed prematurely. This subtle bias initiates a feedback loop where the brain confirms these limiting ideas through selective focus, reinforcing self-imposed limitations. Once, during a late-night conversation with a mentor, we delved into how powerful external environments mold our internal world. She shared how constant exposure to scarcity-driven messages during formative years programs neural pathways that prefer predictability, safety, and minimal risk. Hearing this, I recognized why I repeatedly found myself choosing the known radius, even when unexplored paths beckoned intriguingly. It became clear that the brain isn't just a passive processor. It dynamically protects us by favoring survival-oriented habits, even at the expense of growth. One afternoon, I experimented with a practice that surprised me in its effectiveness, deliberately journaling conversations I had with myself during moments of financial hesitation. Recording these internal dialogues unveiled recurring patterns of self-negotiation laced with caution and underlying dread. The voice would plead, "Is it really worth it? Or what if I lose everything again?" Spotting these habitual refrains helped me see inside the mental theater where fears took center stage, often drowning out the quieter but hopeful voices seeking expression. To deepen this understanding, I began observing physical sensations accompanying financial choices. I noticed my chest tightening when contemplating investments or expansions, a rapid pulse when balancing risks. This mind-body connection illuminated something profound. Financial apprehension isn't just intellectual. It manifests as vivid corporeal signals. Recognizing and naming these somatic cues became a powerful tool, not to suppress them, but to embrace and dialogue with what my body communicated, offering valuable insights into underlying emotional states that words alone could not capture. With that awareness, the next challenge was breaking automation. In one session with a therapist, I practiced a technique called cognitive distancing, where I imagined watching my fears as an outsider would from a safe distance. This mental exercise created enough space to question the validity of my automatic assumptions. For example, I learned to interrogate, is this worry a current reality check or a lingering ghost from past setbacks? Engaging with fears this way reframed them from immutable truths into temporary visitors subject to change. As a tangible experiment, I surprised myself by participating in a local investment club despite my ingrained skepticism. Sharing stories with others who had risked and reinvented their financial narratives introduced me to a spectrum of perspectives I hadn't allowed in before. Hearing candid accounts of trial and error, sacrifice, and eventual breakthroughs helped shatter the illusion that growth unfolded in a straight, flawless path. It revealed that setbacks belong to the journey and are often gateways to deeper learning. One rainy afternoon during that same club meeting, a member recounted their initial paralysis when first faced with a sprawling financial opportunity. The voice within warned of danger, causing hesitation that nearly led to missing out. But with encouragement to proceed carefully, they found success. The story filled me with a cautious hope, illustrating how stepping into discomfort can recalibrate ingrained responses. It was a testament to the brain's neuroplasticity, the ability to rewrite habitual pathways when stimulated by new experiences paired with emotional safety. Later at home, I developed a ritual. Before making financial decisions, I paused to breathe deeply and note feelings emerging in real time. This simple mindfulness practice interrupted habitual reactivity long enough to invite reflection. I caught myself naming fears without judgment, exploring their origins, and gently reminding myself that vulnerability does not equal failure. These micro-moments fostered a gradual shift from rigid avoidance toward curious engagement with uncertainty. Now, when I face a crossroad involving chance or security, I consciously choose to listen to these sensations and narratives, distinguishing reactive responses from authentic intuition. This discernment cultivates confidence in embracing calculated unknowns rather than shrinking prematurely. Such choices no longer feel like battles, but invitations to evolve. Imagine yourself confronting a financial proposal that feels simultaneously enticing and intimidating. What if you could translate that inner turbulence into a language of curiosity and observation, meeting your fears with compassion and inquiry? This approach doesn't negate caution but invites a richer awareness where you outgrow the automatic default settings locking you in. Our internal landscape is complex and multi-layered, intertwined with histories, emotions, and patterns that extend far beyond immediate circumstances. Recognizing how these living tapestries shape our interpretations empowers us to outmaneuver invisible constraints and rewrite the script in alignment with our deeper potential. I recall a particular evening when I sat across from a mentor whose calm presence seemed to dissolve the walls I had built around my money mindset. We weren't discussing budgets or numbers, but stories, deep-seated narratives that held me captive under the guise of caution. As she shared her own unexpected journey from scarcity-driven habits to empowered abundance, what struck me was how she described her mindset as a garden tended over years, not a switch flipped overnight. That image lingered, a living ecosystem requiring patience, nurturing, and attention to intricate details. That night, the notion of emotional ecosystems took root in my mind. I realized my internal landscape was more than a raw battleground of fears and goals. It was a dynamic, interconnected system shaped by countless nuanced interactions between beliefs, emotions, and unconscious patterns. For example, I noticed how certain feelings would emerge as unexpected obstacles, like anger surfacing when I thought I should feel hope, or fatigue dissolving my resolve just as new potential appeared. These emotional undercurrents weren't random, but signals within a delicate system telling me what was remembered, protected, or repressed. Sometimes the patterns played out in my dialogue with others. During a casual brunch, a friend celebrated a bold investment she made, radiating enthusiasm and self-trust. I, however, responded with vague praise, masking an undercurrent of disbelief. Behind my words, a subtle internal critic whispered that her success was unattainable for me, a quiet dismissal wrapped in politeness. Recognizing this automatic reaction was difficult because it felt embedded in my sense of identity, almost like a reflex programmed by years of internal narratives about worthiness and risk. Delving deeper, I started to explore how sensory memories tied to money could enact these silent dramas. I remembered the smell of old, faded bills taped under my grandmother's dresser or the sound of anxious voices during family budgeting sessions. These fragments slid beneath my awareness and shaped how I physically reacted to financial stimuli even decades later. For instance, a sudden notification about an unexpected expense might trigger not only worry but a physical tightness across my chest, as if my body was reliving those unresolved moments of scarcity. To interface with this complex system, I began employing creative practices that bypassed my rational mind's usual defenses. One evening, I wrote a dialogue between two parts of myself, the wary guardian, protective but limited, and an emerging, adventurous self longing for expansion. As I gave voice to each, I uncovered surprising insights. The guardian's fears originated from genuine past pain, not delusions, and the adventurous self needed reassurance, patience, and practical steps, not blind leaps. This experiment felt like illuminating hidden rooms in my psyche, offering a route to negotiate balance. Intrigued by this, I took to visualization exercises. Closing my eyes, I pictured walking through a maze lined with towering hedges, each representing an emotional barrier around money. At the center, a glowing lantern symbolized my sense of abundance. Navigating the maze wasn't about forcing my way through, but listening to the whispers urging detours, pausing at dead ends to reflect and learn. This image embodied how my progress felt cyclical, sometimes frustrating, but rich with subtle breakthroughs rewarding persistence. During a retreat focused on personal growth, a facilitator asked me to imagine the story I told myself when faced with expansive opportunities. The prompt was disarming. What narrative stops you before you take the first step? I realized my story began with warnings, messages about risk, loss, and potential failure repeated so often they were woven into my blueprint. Yet, through this awareness, I grasped my capacity to author an alternative storyline, one embroidered with trust, curiosity, and self-compassion. Another revelation surfaced in recognizing the role of timing within this emotional ecosystem. I saw how sometimes my resistance wasn't about the opportunity itself, but about being asked to change too rapidly. Moments of hesitation revealed snapshots of self-protection, like a seed refusing to sprout before winter passes. Embracing that rhythm, allowing pauses without judgment, became a radical act of kindness toward myself and a strategic way to sustain growth. In the company of close friends, I experimented with articulating my internal system out loud, sharing not just outcomes, but the emotional textures beneath. This vulnerability sparked unexpected connection and diminished my isolation. Hearing their parallel challenges underscored how richly complex these ecosystems are, and how many of us are navigating invisible emotional landscapes with little guidance. Now, when I sense old, automatic reactions emerging, I approach them as invitations to listen rather than battles to win. The emotional ecosystem inside me deserves curiosity, respect, and intentional care. How I cultivate this internal garden directly shapes the breadth of generosity, possibility, and ease I can extend into the external world. This awareness has become central, revealing that the depth and resilience of this system determine whether I'm confined by inherited constraints or blossoming into new horizons. Imagine, then, a moment where a sudden financial decision tugs at your core. Instead of reacting instantly, you find space to notice the emotional symphony playing beneath. Fear's rhythm, excitement's melody, old wounds' dissonant chords. Meeting this orchestra with openness transforms how you move forward, turning instinctive retreat into mindful engagement. There is no quick fix here, no simple rewrite. It is a gradual tending of a living, breathing system, a process that calls for self-acceptance, courage, and connection with the parts we often neglect. As I continue this journey, I am learning that nurturing this ecosystem is the foundation upon which new financial freedom can grow wild and unbidden. One evening, I found myself sitting quietly at a cafe, watching the bustle outside while my mind wrestled with an unexpected wave of resistance about pursuing a freelance project I'd been dreaming of for months. This wasn't the familiar hesitancy born from fear of failure. This felt subtler, as if an invisible tether pulled me backward just as I prepared to step forward. I realized that beneath my usual concerns hid an internal dialogue framed by anticipation of judgment, like an anxious audience waiting to critique every move. This internalized observer echoed early lessons ingrained silently over years, teaching me that reaching beyond modest expectations could make me vulnerable to ridicule or rejection. In that moment of insight, I recognized my instincts were entangled not solely with safety, but with a delicate dance of self-worth and visibility. It was as though every financial decision carried an unwelcome spotlight, demanding perfection or exposing flaws long before action. This sense of exposure often paralyzed me, making it difficult to embrace opportunities without an exhaustive mental checklist designed to ward off imagined criticism. The weight of invisible expectations shackled my movement, crafting barriers from intangible but deeply embedded apprehensions. Months earlier, during a conversation with a close friend navigating her own entrepreneurial path, I had noticed how she spoke openly about embracing imperfections in the journey. Messy starts, uncertain outcomes, and setbacks welcomed as teachers. Her candidness contrasted starkly with my own urge to maintain rigid control, striving to present flawless plans that shielded me from potential failure. This difference revealed how my internal script prized polish and predictability, stigmatizing experimentation as reckless or naive. The gulf between her approach and mine underscored how much my mindset had been conditioned to avoid visibility unless absolutely certain of success. This dynamic was painful to admit because it connected to something core, my fear of being defined solely by outcomes. Success and failure carried exaggerated weight, tipping the scales between worthiness and inadequacy. Consequently, certain choices weren't just financial. They were identity tests, challenging the balance of who I believed I could be. The added pressure made the act of deciding exhausting, pushing me towards safer, smaller steps, even when larger possibilities glimmered tantalizingly. One afternoon, while journaling beneath the warm light streaming from my window, I wrote a letter addressed to that part of me, the the one fearful of stepping into the spotlight. I imagined releasing her from the impossible demand to always be impeccable, offering instead permission to be visible in all her flawed, courageous humanity. Writing those words awakened a tenderness I hadn't allowed myself before, softening the edges of self-criticism with understanding and grace. It became a pivotal moment where compassion started to reshape the architecture of my internal world. Not long after, I agreed to share my work at a local community event. The thought alone sent a tremor through me. What if my ideas weren't good enough? What if others judged me harshly? When the evening arrived, however, something surprising happened. As I spoke, imperfections surfaced, the microphone wavered, my voice stumbled, but the audience responded with warmth and encouragement. Their reception dismantled the expectation that visibility demanded flawlessness. It taught me that connection comes through authenticity, not just polished presentations. Beyond this experience, I've since noticed how the fear of exposure intertwines with deeply rooted beliefs about deservingness. It presents as a silent barrier that precludes risk-taking by suggesting that if I reveal too much, I might lose what little security I have. Yet, in truth, the concealment exacts its own toll, isolating me from growth, learning, and meaningful relationships. Recognizing this tension invites the possibility of reframing mistakes and vulnerability as gateways to resilience, not evidence of inadequacy. I recall a vivid instance when an unexpected client requested a proposal with a tight deadline. Initially, panic surged, fueled by doubts about my credibility. Instead of withdrawing, I chose to meet that challenge openly, admitting my initial concerns to a supportive colleague. Their affirmation emboldened me to proceed with honesty and effort. The experience unveiled how sharing uncertainty doesn't diminish capability. It forges bridges grounded in trust and shared humanity. Reflecting on these episodes, I understand the crucial role emotional attunement plays in navigating unseen barriers to growth. Tuning into bodily sensations accompanying moments of hesitation, whether a knot in the stomach or tightness in the chest, has become a valuable compass. It grants me clues about unresolved fears or internalized messages holding sway beneath conscious awareness. Listening to these signals with patience allows for nuanced responses instead of impulsive retreat or overcorrection. Now, consider how this insight might serve you when confronted with a promising opportunity that stirs discomfort. Rather than silencing inner doubts, what if you regarded them as guides revealing areas deserving attention and dialogue? This awareness offers a chance to move thoughtfully, striking a balance between protecting yourself and embracing expansion. Ultimately, the journey toward embracing visibility, imperfection, and vulnerability transforms how I relate to opportunity itself. It opens space for creativity unbound by rigid formulas and invites connection through authenticity. Each step beyond invisible constraints rewrites the narrative not only of wealth but of self-worth, illuminating paths previously shrouded in shadow. There was a moment during a quiet morning walk when my mind unexpectedly spiraled into a swirl of anxious what-ifs. A vibrant new job offer sat before me. More responsibility, greater pay, but equally daunting changes. My heart raced not because I doubted my skills, but because an internal voice whispered warnings about stepping too far outside my comfort zone. Yet what surprised me was that these warnings weren't born from current facts. Instead, they echoed a deep-seated pattern of associating success with potential collapse, as though achieving more inevitably invited loss. This tangled relationship between assent and threat colored my view with shades of self-imposed limitation. In reminiscing, I realized the architecture of this mindset resembled a subtle script written by layers of past encounters with uncertainty, each leaving its imprint like invisible brushstrokes across my inner landscape. This psychological dossier dictated a cautious pacing in endeavors, an automatic hesitation that slowed my forward momentum. I liken it to a dimly lit control room where alarm signals blare prematurely, triggering shutdown procedures before assessing the true nature of the situation. The real challenge was learning to differentiate old alarms from genuine threats. Such distinctions didn't come easily. Whenever opportunity knocked loudly, my mind tended to fill with rehearsed refrains emphasizing stability's safety net. Interestingly, This response wasn't simply about fear. It originated from a complex tapestry woven with experiences of unpredictability and the subtle resignations of someone molded by environments governed by scarcity. I found myself navigating a maze with walls constructed from previous disappointments, disguised as cautionary tales handed down through family whispers and cultural undercurrents. These inner narratives shaped protective mechanisms that at times felt like invisible shackles. Building on this awareness, I embarked on an experiment, reframing success stories around me as counter-narratives to my ingrained assumptions. I began seeking examples of individuals who embraced growth without succumbing to destructive fear, whose journeys illuminated paths out of scarcity mindsets. Rather than merely absorbing their outcomes, I immersed myself in their process, the self-talk, incremental risks, and resilience cultivated amid setbacks. Through this immersion, a quiet but persistent seed of possibility took root within, revealing new ways to interpret what's achievable. Meanwhile, a surprising revelation unfolded as I started paying attention to the language used in moments of internal conflict. Frequently, I caught myself slipping into metaphors akin to walking on thin ice or balancing on a tightrope, highlighting how precarious advancement felt in my psyche. Recognizing the power metaphors wield, I experimented with crafting new expressions, imagining instead a sturdy bridge arching over turbulent waters, inviting confident crossing rather than fearful balance. This linguistic shift subtly recalibrated my emotional response, inviting steadiness rather than tremulousness. An unexpected turn came during a collaborative project when I volunteered to lead a presentation in front of unfamiliar peers. As I prepared, past apprehensions stirred. What if I falter? What if I lose credibility? But this time, I chose to view these worries as curious observers rather than dictators. On the day, I discovered that imperfections were met with empathy rather than judgment, and that genuine connection blossomed from vulnerability more than from flawless execution. This experience dismantled another piece of internalized distrust, affirming growth requires embracing discomfort as a companion, not an adversary. In reflecting further, I saw how my internal system had conditioned me to equate financial expansion with amplifying existing vulnerabilities, as if stepping into abundance would magnify deficiencies glaringly. This assumption revealed itself as a carefully constructed mirage obstructing a wide landscape of potential. To shift this paradigm, I practiced intentionally identifying moments when I unconsciously minimized my desires or downplayed plans to feel safe. Each time, I gently challenged these impulses, asking, what would it feel like to value abundance as a normal state, not an exception or threat? Though unsettling at first, this inquiry opened gateways toward reshaping my implicit beliefs. Now, when a fresh opportunity beckons, I notice the subtle signals arising within my body, a flutter of anticipation intertwined with residual hesitation. Instead of instantly retreating or charging ahead, I suspend judgment and engage in a brief internal dialogue, allowing both excitement and caution their place in the conversation. Through this balanced engagement, I discern whether hesitation stems from practical considerations or echoes of past programming seeking to constrain growth. This practice nurtures a richer, more adaptive response pattern. Imagine standing at a crossroads where a significant financial decision awaits. Could you invite yourself to listen deeply, like tuning an instrument, to the various sensations and thoughts stirring beneath the surface? Could you trace back the origins of resistance without blame, approaching them with gentle inquiry? Such an openness expands your capacity to write new scripts, replacing unseen barricades with bridges toward possibility. This transformation doesn't demand abandoning prudence, but invites a fresh equilibrium between caution and courage, crafted from self-awareness rather than inherited fear. Reflecting on this journey so far, I sense an intricate dance unfolding inside me. Images of a delicate tapestry woven from threads of memory, emotion, and long-held belief. It is as if the tangled roots beneath a towering tree are slowly revealing themselves, each one carrying whispers not only of where the tree has taken shelter, but also of where it might grow next. These hidden undercurrents don't just linger in the shadows. They pulse with a quiet insistence, asking to be seen, felt, and engaged with in ways that transcend surface awareness. There's a peculiar tension in this moment, where the old maps begin to dissolve and uncharted terrain emerges just beyond the edge of vision. It feels akin to standing on a shoreline, watching the ebb and flow of tides that both carry away remnants of the past and deposit fresh shells rich with possibility. I notice how the mind, which once clung tightly to familiar scripts, now hesitates, curious but cautious, caught between the impulse to retreat towards safety and the stirring invitation to embrace something broader, even if uncertain. This suspension carries an energy all its own, a fertile pause where transformation lingers in the air like the scent of rain before a storm. In the quiet spaces between thought and feeling, I become attuned to a subtle rhythm humming beneath the surface. It is not loud or commanding, but steady and patient, like a heartbeat echoing from deepest within. This rhythm pulses through doubts that once threatened to paralyze and through hopes barely whispered, weaving them into a new cadence that expands the contours of what I dared to imagine. It reminds me that growth is not a sudden leap, but a series of small awakenings, each opening a door, just a crack, enough to let fresh light spill inside. Alongside this unfolding awareness, there emerges an urge to listen more deeply, not only to the stories that have shaped me, but to the spaces between them, those silent pauses pregnant with unresolved longing and potential. These gaps feel alive, as if they contain the breath of a future self waiting patiently to step forward, unhindered by invisible chains. I find myself drawn to these still waters, sensing that beneath their calm surface lies a reservoir of strength and possibility that logic alone cannot access. The convergence of these inner currents creates a landscape textured with both challenge and grace. It reveals the way old patterns can hold the tenderness of survival while simultaneously calling for release. In this terrain, I sense the invitation to move with care, honoring each fragment of my story while gently loosening the bonds that limit movement. The path ahead is neither linear nor prescribed. It resembles a winding river carving new canyons, shaped by persistent flow, yet responding to the unique contours it encounters. I can almost hear a quiet conversation taking place within. Voices that once spoke with absolute certainty now soften, engaging in dialogue instead of decree. This shift feels like trading armor for vulnerability, trading rigid boundaries for flexible curiosity. It is not a surrender, but an opening, a willingness to lean into discomfort with the tender hope that the spaces of not knowing can be fertile ground for emergence. This internal negotiation unfolds with a humbleness that honors the complexity of change, acknowledging that transformation seldom arrives fully formed but emerges through patient unfolding. As I move through this threshold, I sense a call toward integration, an invitation to blend the threads of past experiences with the dreams of what lies ahead, weaving them into a fabric both resilient and expansive. The process asks for both grounded awareness and imaginative courage, a balance between honoring what has been and embracing what could be. It feels less like rewriting a story and more like unearthing a hidden manuscript whose pages wait patiently for new ink, fresh interpretations, and tender care. This moment, suspended between history and possibility, holds a palpable tension charged with potential. It beckons me to step closer, to listen with openness, and to trust that the quiet stirrings beneath the surface point toward a horizon where limitation gives way to invitation. It feels as if I stand at the threshold of a door whose hinges whisper promises of new landscapes, not entirely unfamiliar, yet transformed by the willingness to journey beyond familiar walls. In sharing this reflection with you, I invite you to sit with that same tension, the delicate balance of holding what has always been true while welcoming the uncertain unfolding of what might yet become. To approach the invisible architecture of our inner worlds without rush, with kindness, and with attentive presence. For it is within this sacred interstice that the seeds of shift take root, coaxed gently by our willingness to move, to listen, and to grow. The evening air was cool against my skin as I walked slowly through familiar streets, yet the world inside me seemed to shift in subtle, profound ways. I carried with me a quiet realization that the boundaries I once accepted as unchangeable were, in fact, more pliable than I had imagined. The invisible script guiding my hesitations and doubts had not disappeared overnight, but its grip loosened, inviting me to step beyond old shadows toward a wider, luminous horizon. In this moment of calm movement, I sensed how deeply intertwined our inner narratives are with the worlds we create outside ourselves. Each thought, each impulse, plants a seed whose growth shapes the soil beneath future choices. What once seemed like rigid limitations now appeared as invitations, coded messages urging us to question, to reconsider, to expand the frame through which we see ourselves and our potential. The journey toward growth is less a leap and more a gradual unfolding, a dance of tender curiosity and courageous inquiry. I recalled a conversation with an old friend who described her own struggles with unseen boundaries, speaking softly about the tightrope between fear and hope. Her vulnerability sparked something within me, a shared recognition that this line we walk is not a weakness, but a crucible where transformation brews. In her words, I heard encouragement to embrace the discomfort that accompanies change as a signpost signaling the clearing of old terrain so new paths might emerge. As I continued, a breeze stirred leaves along the sidewalk, each flutter reminiscent of the countless moments when old fears tried to anchor me in place. Yet each step forward proved to be a quiet act of rebellion, not against my past, but against the inertia it imposed. I realized progress doesn't require the complete erasure of history. Instead, it calls for kindness toward each fragment of our story and a willingness to let some chapters close gently as new narratives take shape. These walks, these quiet reflections, taught me that transformation often reveals itself in intangible shifts, the softening of internal resistance, the willingness to hold complexity without rushing for certainty, the emergence of a voice that neither demands perfection nor laments shortcoming. It's a voice grounded in presence and care, capable of navigating the unknown with steadiness born from self-trust rather than rigid control. One evening, as dusk settled in hues of deep violet, I found myself smiling at the ebb and flow within, a landscape alive with ebbing doubts and rising courage. I realized that embracing this fluidity, this dynamic tension, is an act of profound liberation. It means welcoming the paradox of strength in vulnerability and growth in uncertainty. In this embrace, new possibilities ripple onward in ways unseen but deeply felt. I hold an image now of a bridge suspended not by rigid cables, but woven from threads of intention, memory, and hope, stretching across the expanse between fear and freedom. Crossing this bridge doesn't guarantee clear skies, but it opens space to move with greater openness, granting us permission to discover how vast our capacity truly is. If I were to offer a gentle invitation to you, it would be this: lean into the currents beneath your own surface, the whispers, the hesitations, the quiet longs, and meet them with patience and compassion. Allow yourself the freedom to explore the contours of your inner world without haste or judgment. In doing so, you may find that the invisible weights begin to dissolve, revealing the horizon's vast expanse waiting just beyond familiar stalls. Our paths are uniquely illuminated through the interplay of shadow and light, of what we inherit and what we choose to create anew. As I continue forward, I carry a growing sense that we are not defined by the confines set upon us, but by the courage to rewrite the codes within, layer by delicate layer, with mindful hands and open hearts. Each moment holds the potential for breakthrough, for extending beyond what was once thought impossible. Recognizing this interwoven truth empowers me to step intentionally into the unknown, not with certainty erased by fear, but with a boldness nurtured from embracing complexity, resilience, and possibility. In the quiet unfolding of these realities, I glimpse the true essence of freedom, a journey inward and outward that invites us to align with our deepest capacity for growth. It is here, in this sacred convergence, that our stories transform, not because we forget where we have been, but because we dare to move toward all that we might become.